Willkommen, bienvenue, welcome once again to another live stream, this time with Mark Jarvis, Startup, Scale Up, Sail Up. He is a business consultant who's made it his mission to make sure that businesses, frankly, work better so that they are capable of scaling up. Mark Jarvis, today's topic, I believe, hang on, let me get it in front of me, is what are the pros and cons of succession planning? Mark.
Absolutely, yes. Thank you very much for that, Gareth. Thrown straight in there, of course. Yeah, it's a really interesting topic. I find, I have a commercial fascination, I guess, with all sorts of things business related. And I was thinking the other day about what we tend to do when we start a business. Particularly, I'm particularly talking about the small sole trader, 2 or 3 people, micro business sort of side of things. I think it's absolutely true that when you sort of reach a sort of a medium size or small to medium sized business, you've started to think about these sorts of things, but only because you had to. So I thought it might be useful just to explore a couple of thoughts today, just in terms of what does it really mean and what are the pros and cons and when really should we start thinking about this?
Yes, I was going to ask you about that. Obviously, we are 2 gentlemen of a certain age. So succession planning is critical to us. We're not always going to be as capable as we are now. We need to make sure that it flows on to the right people, or the right people keep going our legacy. But should we be talking about it when we're even younger?
Well, certainly from a business point of view, I don't think we've necessarily got time to get into the whole personal legacy stuff, but that's what we invest in a pension for, isn't it? For our personal life. I don't do it, I do it for me, but I do it for my family. I do it for my children, for my grandchildren. That's what it's for, isn't it? So why is it so difficult for us to think about that sort of thing when we talk about business? And I think back to my grandfather used to be a bricklayer. Building all sorts of different things like that, and he actually was part of the team that built Gatwick Airport, which is an interesting fact for the day. He didn't do it on his own, obviously. Anyway,
I was going to say, so he's Speedy Gonzales if he did.
Absolutely, but it sort of reminds me really that when people in construction and things build things, that they don't build things for themselves; they build things for the future. They build things for their legacy. For anybody that knows me a little bit, and if you've seen my LinkedIn, you know that I'm a bit of a fan of architecture and things like that, particularly ecclesiastical architecture, sort of churches and cathedrals and things like that. And you think to yourself, how many people did it take to build a cathedral? So it's not a quiz. How many people did it take to build a cathedral, and how long did it take them? And decades and centuries, in some cases, it took people to do this. So people were still building a cathedral. The people who started building it weren't the people who finished building it,
right?
And it's still there 1,000 years later, etc., and I think to yourself, whilst I'm not suggesting that perhaps our business might be there 1,000 years later, what are we going to do with our business when we're done with it, when we decide to retire or whatever it might be that we decide to do? What's going to happen to our business? Because we've built something which has a legacy. We've got a set of clients, we've got a set of customers that are customers of that business. What's going to happen to those clients when we're done with our business? Unless you have a plan, an exit strategy, a succession plan, or whatever you want to call it, unless you've got that in place and you know what it's going to be, where are your customers going to go, for a start? Not least of which, where are your team going to go? Team are obviously passed over to the next buyer, perhaps, but how are you going to start that transfer process, and how are you going to create a legacy of leadership in an organization such that leadership there is there to carry that legacy forward? So all fascinating questions, and it's something, as I say, I find to be really interesting from a sort of a sole trader, small micro business side of things, where people really don't start to think about these sorts of things until they're 5, 10, 15 years into their business. And I'm suggesting perhaps we ought to start thinking about that sort of thing sooner, because not only do we never know what's going to happen, but also, if we don't know what we're building and when we're building it for, what's the point in building it?
I would say that many people are spending so much time on business as usual, in the business, keeping it going, making sure that all the mouths are fed and all the suppliers paid and all the rest of it, that they forget that there are key members of that team It may be them that is the fundament of it all, the prime mover, and that if anything were to happen to that key element, then it doesn't matter how many happy suppliers or how many happy customers they got, nothing would happen. Nothing would work.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, when I think about the business that I started last year, I'm the oldest person in the business. I am, you know, and I'm not building the business for me. Yes, of course, you know, it's creating a legacy for my children, my grandchildren, but the business is built to be run by people who will succeed me in my leadership and ownership of the business, because the business has got its own entity, the business has got its own customers, and the business deserves a future. It's not something that it's fair for us to not think about, but also be prepared to just simply walk away from. And I see this happen quite a lot. You know, people that in small micro businesses, they don't really know what they're going to do. There's no succession plan. There's no exit strategy or anything like that. And all they're thinking about is, we'll just walk away. We'll just close the business, or we'll just walk away. And that's it, which seems to be an awful waste to me.
It seems very sad to me.
Absolutely. When you've created something which is a movement, it's a purpose, you're creating you're doing something wonderful in the world, you're creating a product or service for your clients, and you're simply prepared to just walk away from that. That's, as you say, Gareth, it's a good word. It is sad.
So, okay, look, as much as how onerous this all sounds, there are small steps you can take to start the process. It doesn't have to be a full-on, let's rip the business apart and allocate it to a person or any. There are small steps that can be taken, are there not?
Absolutely, Gareth. Yes, and you know, I'm a great believer in creating a business with a purpose. You know, in our modern world with global competition and all the sort of thing that we have around us today, people buy the purpose of a business. They don't really buy the product or service anymore. So, you know, when you can really understand what that purpose is, that's the thing that creates a legacy in a business, because it's that purpose that persists beyond the individual. So when we're thinking about small things that you could do, really perhaps just make sure that you're very, very clear on the purpose of the business. Who are you serving? Why are you doing these things? Why is that important to you? And why is it important to the business to be able to support your clients and customers in that way? And I think that's a really good place to start. The second thing to do, I think, is to really start thinking about a training and development program to bring future leaders, bring emerging leaders through your organization.
Right.
You may not have employed them yet. You know, it may just be you or maybe 2 or 3 people in the business. But typically, if you're a founder in a business, you're a little bit like me, you're more likely to be the oldest person in the business, you know, and you're starting to employ people who are graduates or perhaps younger people. So to create a training and development program for those people as well, where they can see the destination, the journey that exists towards the next tenure in the business.
So it's always important to have in mind, I suppose, the next step of the business, but also from the viewpoint of, if it grows this much bigger, if it goes in that much direction, who are the key movers within the business, and how are they planned for from a succession point of view?
Correct. Yeah. Which again speaks to that leadership and development process, not just for people in the team, but for yourself as well. You know, I undertake constant learning and development with myself, you know, going to workshops and courses and learning programs and all sorts of things like that. So it's important that we develop ourselves in the same way. But yeah, it's a fascinating area, I think. And as you said earlier on, it's very easy for a micro business owner, founder, or a couple of people, perhaps partners, to be caught up in the here and now. You know, they're trying to make the balance sheet work at the end of the day. You know, they perhaps need to pay their own wages, perhaps need to pay the salary, pay the rent, all the things that they need to pay just to keep the lights on, almost. But what happens beyond that? And one of the barriers I find to starting to think about, not just succession planning and exit strategies and things like that, but anything which starts to work or help a person work on the business, is that they say they don't have time. They say they don't have the time, and they say they don't have the money.
Yes.
And that's true. You know, it's a consequence of being a busy micro business, is that you are busy. And that's nice. That's great. But that doesn't exclude us from the responsibility of creating something, a legacy in our organization, in our business that persists beyond us.
I once interviewed Richard Branson, and I used to do a lot of pitching competitions. I used to love that. And at one of them, after it, I'd come second, I think. I got to chat to Richard Branson, who was one of the judges. And I said, so what's the secret of your success? Being cheeky, I was. And he said, well, in truth, I found the stuff that I thought I was good at, found people that were better at it than me, employed them, and stood back. And I think delegation is the only part of this that will enable you to scale anyway. And then the people you delegate to need to be part of that succession plan, so that way your business is secure. I mean, this is just me thinking it through logically.
Yeah. And, when we say it out loud like that, it is obvious, isn't it? It's, almost one of those, what do we call it? A blinding flash of the obvious, don't we, really?
Yeah.
And it's true. When we say
another
like
epiphany.
When we say it like that, it is obvious. Yet so many people are just tied up in the here and now, focused on keeping the lights on and paying the bills and getting a customer and serving that client and doing all the things, that they don't have the opportunity or the capacity to start thinking a little bit further ahead. And I agree, absolutely. In fact, actually, it's a mantra on my wall. I don't know whether you can see that on the wall there. It's one of my favorite sayings, and that's why I have it on the wall. Only do what only you can do. Because that is the mantra in business leadership. Because as you rightly say, there are only a small number of things that I'm really good at, thankfully.
But do you know what? I decided as my mission, this is only a decision I made about 5 months ago, to try and make myself redundant from the business. But not in one go, but over time, to try and get other members of my business, because I've now grown to 14 people in my business overall, and there are at least 1 or 2 people in there that I can start delegating some of my day-to-day. And I want to get to the point where if I disappeared for a week, a month, 6 months even, the business would still be running.
And that's a really interesting question, isn't it? I think most micro business owners could say they can take 2 weeks holiday and the business will still be there at the end of it. There might be a few fires to put out.
I think it's a rarity, though. I think most of them, there will be, at some point, there will be a decision point. And up until then, the only person that could take that decision is that person in the business. And of course, they're sunning themselves in Marbella. They can't make that decision, so everything has to stick around until they come back.
Yeah.
Either that, or they're doing the thing where they're constantly referring to phones while they're on holiday, which is another problem.
Well, yeah, we're not getting into that. So the question on the table today is what are we going to do about this? As a small business, as a micro business owner, what are you going to do about that? Are you prepared to just sit and wait until you either get to a size of business where you have to start thinking about this,
right?
Which is where what most people do is they don't start doing things until they have to start doing things, which means they're always playing catch up. And it's the same thing in business growth, in scaling businesses and all sorts of things like that. If we only do what we need to do when we have to do it, all we'll ever do is play catch up. And whether that's catch up to the competition or catch up to yourself, whatever it might be.
And also I find that when you take that attitude, you usually only do just enough to get you out of that mess, rather than allowing for expansion or allowing for change.
Yes. And, I always often say to people, if good is good enough, then I can't help. I can only help people for whom great is an option. They might not know what that is yet. That's fine. But for those people that are open-minded enough to say, actually, I'd like the option, good is not good enough. I want great. But they just don't see the pathway to get there. That's where people like me come in. Anyway, so, circling back to the questions on the table, what are we actually going to do about this? You've got to, I hope the conversation that Gareth and I have had just briefly today has helped a few people to just say, you know what, I didn't think about that. That's a really good idea. Perhaps I'm going to assign some time to do that. And if I can give you some advice, just put a date in your diary, put some time in your diary, maybe an hour or something like that of free time. Think about when is your most productive time. If you're a morning person or an afternoon person, there's nothing else on the table, no distractions, and think about what your business is going to look like 10 years ahead. Whether you're in it or not, there will have to be some progress towards succession planning. You might still be in the business, but you might not be working. You know, you might be on the business, but you might not be in the business. And I think there was a post, I think recently I popped a post up there about, you know, when is it time to step up, but not step back?
Yes, exactly. I mean, I don't envisage my disappearance from my business at all, but I would like it so that I'm not an intrinsic part of it anymore. I'd like it that it runs and that there are functions in it that will go, that the clients are happy, that new clients are being prospected, that the machines of industry rattle on forward, and that I can be there either as a sort of a benign father figure or help at strategy level. But no, to get there, it's a series of steps. Mark, thank you very much for at least asking what some people might find a quite difficult question. I think, guys, if you found any of this jars you, causes you pause for thought, or at the very least confirms what you already were thinking, I would recommend have a call with Mark. At the very least, he'll just dot the I's and cross the T's, but potentially you could come up with brand new ideas and direction that you hadn't even envisaged up till now. Thank you once again, Mark. Every time we do this, it is a bit of a learning curve for me as well. And I wish all of you, please have yourselves a lovely weekend. The sun's out, for goodness sake. And of course, safe mental health. Bye-bye now.
Thanks, everybody.